upon this Thursday edition of Newsline at Noon with her Prime Minister nominee resigning over alleged ethical lapses. President Park Geun-hye has run into problems in her government reform drive. Final opinion polls allowed to be published before next week's local elections show many ruling and opposition party candidates are neck and neck in their races. Plus, Washington considers deploying its missile defense system in South Korea, pressuring Seoul to buy U.S. missile systems to better cope with the North Korean threat. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon. It's noon Thursday, May 29th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, former Supreme Court Justice Ahn Dai-hee's sudden withdrawal as President Park Geun-hye's nominee for Prime Minister has left her reform plan in tatters.
In fact, it's expected to delay the entire restructuring process and possibly other administrative affairs. Choi You-sun has more.
When President Park announced her pick for Prime Minister 1 week ago, it was considered by many as a reflection of her commitment to reform Korean society. Former Supreme Court Justice Ahn Dai-hee's principles and integrity were highly touted upon his nomination. It was said those traits would help him carry out sweeping reforms, despite the fact that he had butted heads with the president during her campaign in 2012 while spearheading the ruling party's political reforms. But President Park's nomination quickly backfired after Ahn was accused of receiving privileges for his previous post in the private sector. It was discovered that he made about $1.5 million in a period of just 5 months last year working as a lawyer after leaving the Supreme Court. The president, who had pledged to root out cronyism in Korean society in the aftermath of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, ended up nominating someone who was at the very center of it. Ahn's surprise resignation Wednesday has dented the president's efforts to reform the government and to assuage public anger over the government's lax management of the ferry accident. The president is widely expected to take more time to make her next pick, possibly after next Wednesday's local elections. This means the much-anticipated cabinet reshuffle will not likely take place until after mid-June. It's also uncertain as to when the president will name her new security advisor and intelligence chief. And amid criticism over the latest personnel debacle, the fate of Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun and other aides at the presidential office are also now in question. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
Just 6 days are left until Koreans head to the polls for the local elections, and beginning this Thursday, new opinion polls are prohibited from being released on the media, and early voting will start nationwide tomorrow. Our Kwon So-ah has the details.
The races are tightening up with less than a week to go until the elections. Voters are in the final stages of deciding on which mayor or governor they want to represent them. The latest poll numbers show the ruling Saenuri Party has the upper hand in 6 regions, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 5, an independent candidate in 1, and the rest of the 5 regions are neck and neck at this stage. An opinion poll conducted by Research and Research has the incumbent mayor of Seoul, Park Geun-hye, still in lead over his conservative rival Chung Mong-jun, but the gap has narrowed compared to 2 weeks ago. In Gyeonggi-do Province, which has the largest number of eligible voters, the ruling Saenuri Party's candidate for the governor's post has a slight lead over the opposition candidate Kim Jin-pyo. A very tense race is expected in Busan, which is getting a lot of attention this time around, as independent candidate Oh Go-don is receiving great support. Voter sentiment will become more unpredictable in the following days, as from this Thursday, the National Election Commission forbids the release of newly conducted opinion polls to the media. Anything could happen in the coming days to turn these ratings on their head, as the voter tendency among different age groups and voter turnout play a big role in the actual results. For those who won't be able to vote on the actual voting day, early voting for the first time in Korea will begin Friday for 2 days at some 3,500 polling stations across the country. Kwon-soa, Arirang News.
The United States is weighing up whether to deploy an advanced missile defense system in South Korea. The Pentagon is making a fresh push to expand a US-led system to its allies in Northeast Asia to counter the North Korean missile threat. Our Park Geun-hye tells us more.
Quoting a Pentagon official, the Wall Street Journal reports that Washington has conducted a site survey for possible deployment locations in South Korea for its Theater High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD. No final decision has been made yet on the system, which is designed to intercept a diverse range of missiles. South Korean officials have long indicated that Seoul would prefer to develop its own defenses rather than taking part in the US-led system. With that in mind, the report quotes the Pentagon official as saying that the US could deploy the THAAD system to South Korea for a temporary period and then replace it with another system purchased by Seoul. It could also let Seoul buy its own missile defense system. The vice chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, James Winnefeld, meanwhile, is calling for better regional missile defense cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Speaking at a seminar in Washington Wednesday, Winnefeld emphasized the importance of developing a regional missile defense system between its main allies to effectively counter North Korean threats. U.S. Congress also passed a bill last week calling on the Defense Secretary to assess the opportunities to strengthen ballistic missile defense cooperation among Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. This is raising pressure on South Korea to join the U.S.-led missile defense system. Given Seoul's reluctance to join the U.S.-led system and the development of its own missile defense system, the issue is expected to be one of top agenda items at an upcoming trilateral meeting between the defense chiefs of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The officials are scheduled to meet this weekend on the sidelines of the Asia Security Summit in Singapore. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
North Korea and Japan have wrapped up their three-day talks in Stockholm, but are still no closer to resolving their outstanding diplomatic issues. During the meeting, Japanese government officials urged Pyongyang to carry out a full and thorough investigation into the whereabouts of Japanese nationals who were abducted by the North decades ago. In return, North Korea demanded Tokyo ease sanctions imposed on the regime after it conducted a series of nuclear missile tests. Although no progress was made at this meeting, both sides agreed to meet again at a later date.
And a UN Human Rights Office aiming to monitor human rights conditions in North Korea will be set up in South Korea. The Geneva-based Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said Wednesday that its field-based structure will be set up in Seoul, with the South Korean government having given approval. The decision to open the Seoul office was made after the UN Council adopted a report in March denouncing North Korea's systematic human rights violations. The field office, which will be operated independently according to the UN's basic principles, is expected to be set up in the latter half of this year. Now, to a new survey that shows more than half of South Korean population see North Korea as a partner of cooperation rather than an enemy. A poll commissioned by the Unification Ministry on Thursday shows 58% of the 1,000 respondents said they view the North as a country that South Korea should and does cooperate with. Just under a quarter said Seoul should provide aid to North Korea, while only 13% viewed North Korea as a hostile country. In regards to President Park Geun-hye's North Korea policies, 77% replied they supported her push for a trust-building process with Pyongyang. 7 out of 10 also agreed with her description of unification as a bonanza.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju with
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about Now, authorities have so far been unable to track down Yoo Byung-an, the practical owner of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry, and he remains on the run. But they have tracked down his assets, which total well over $200 million, and they're now taking steps to freeze them. For the latest on the investigation, our Ji Myung-gil reports.
Korean prosecutors said Wednesday that they have started taking legal steps to freeze more than $200 million worth of assets held by the owner family of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry. Yoo Byung-an, the head of Cheongjin Marine Company, which operated the ill-fated ferry, and his family are suspected of having accumulated at least $234 million worth of earnings through various crimes both at home and abroad. The Incheon District Prosecutor's Office, which is leading the case, said it has asked the Incheon District Court to freeze the assets of Yoo and his 3 children to prevent them from stashing away cash or real estate holdings before trials. Yoo and his 3 children, Seomna, Daegyun, and Hyuk-gi, are wanted on a string of corruption charges and irregularities that are believed to have contributed to the sinking of the ferry. It is all part of an effort to hold the fugitive family criminally liable for the deadly April 16th disaster. Meanwhile, a French court has rejected a request by Yoo Byung-an's eldest daughter, Seomna, to be released on bail. The process for having her extradited to Korea began Wednesday, but could take up to a year. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
And moving on to some economic news, April was another bullish month for Korea in terms of its current account surplus. Central bank officials attribute last month's surplus to firm auto and steel exports. Arirang News' Hwang Jie has the details.
Korea has been posting a current account surplus every month for more than 2 years. The central bank said Thursday that the nation posted a surplus of over $7.1 billion last month. That's a tad less than the $7.3 billion surplus in March, but up by more than $2.5 billion from the same month last year. The Bank of Korea has forecast the surplus for the year to reach $68 billion. This target looks attainable considering the accumulated surplus in the January to April period that already stands at over $22 billion. Exports rose 10% from the previous year in April to more than $56 billion, helped by strong shipments of automobiles, petroleum, and steel products. But imports dropped 0.9% to $46 billion, raising concerns the nation's continuous surplus trend is mostly down to sluggish domestic demand. The strong current account surplus might also burden local exporters in that it will add additional upward pressure to the strengthening Korean won. The deficit in the service account, which includes tourism and shipping, however, widened, posting a shortfall of around $1 billion last month compared with a deficit of $650 million in March. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Korean construction firms have won nearly $31 billion worth of overseas orders so far this year. The Land Ministry and the International Contractors Association of Korea say that's up 33% compared to the same period last year. It's only the second time for the amount to surpass the $30 billion mark in the first half of the year, and the first time was in 2010, but given that was when Korea's $20 billion nuclear power plant deal with the United Arab Emirates was sealed, industry officials say this is essentially the first time the amount has topped the $30 billion mark before the end of June. The government attributed the increase to local companies winning huge projects in countries like Kuwait and Iraq.
Now, we've seen a number of internet giants acquire mobile messaging applications in recent months. Those who got in the race early have been reaping the benefits financially. Those slow out of the blocks find themselves playing catch-up, and the prospects of catching up don't look very good at all. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Analysts expect we'll see more mergers between internet companies and mobile messengers. Among the top 500 companies in the world in terms of market value, Bloomberg says just 3 internet companies have gained market value so far this year: Facebook, Tencent, and Naver. A common thread between the three companies is that they all merged with or acquired a mobile messenger service provider early on. After its acquisition of WhatsApp earlier this year, Facebook gained more than 21% of market capitalization, standing at $162.3 billion. Tencent maintained its dominance in the Chinese market, with its popular WeChat messaging application gaining nearly 11%. Korea's Naver, which owns its own mobile messenger provider Line with 420 million users worldwide, has rejoined the top 500 list after going in and out since late last year. Naver's market capitalization value stood at $24.3 billion, and its stock price has increased around 7.5% this year. More integration between internet companies and mobile messengers are expected to lead to new and convenient functions for users. After Korea-based internet company Taum Communications and mobile messenger Kakao merged earlier this week, Kakao said its users would be able to conduct money transactions in the latter half of this year. Internet companies that have not made moves to quickly incorporate mobile messaging providers have been left in the dark. The market value of Yahoo and Yahoo Japan fell more than 12% and 20% respectively this year. Yahoo tried to get in the race later by acquiring mobile messenger Blink this month, but the effects have yet to be seen as Blink is still in its initial stages as a company. Yahoo Japan has remained on the sidelines. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
The global war between Korean tech giant Samsung and Apple has largely been waged on the smartphone battlefield thus far, but Samsung's latest product, a gadget for your wrist that promises to keep your health in check, may just represent the first shot in another looming battle between the two companies. Our Yulian explains.
It looks much like the Galaxy smartwatch, but this wristband called a SIM-band is what Samsung calls a health platform to rule them all. Readings for heart rate, blood flow, hydration level, and the amount of CO2 in your blood can all be obtained when different wavelengths of light are beamed onto your skin from the device. It can also gather data from non-Samsung health trackers as well, using cloud-based software. Samsung unveiled the SIM-band in San Francisco this week, just days before Apple is expected to detail plans for its own health data platform. It's a signal that the smartphone battlefield may now begin to extend to the mobile healthcare device sector. And it's not just global tech giants, but also mid-sized firms that are jumping in. This was evident at Asia's biggest healthcare congress that kicked off this week. Take this portable heart monitor, for example.
The device can send the collected data to your smartphone via Bluetooth. You can then send it to your doctor directly.
This medicine dispenser is useful for patients who often forget to take their medicine.
Pharmacists have information that you take the right pill at the right time, and also is the patient sent back the information about the compliance.
Experts say the demand for such mobile health devices will continue to rise.
Since people live longer, there's a greater desire to take care of their health themselves. As there is a lot of data made available through different sensor technologies, there is naturally a rise in businesses that provide health services utilizing that data.
Yurian, Arirang News.
Now to some very welcome news for the nation's farmers. Korea has regained its status as a nation free of foot and mouth disease. The Agriculture Ministry says its efforts to contain and prevent outbreaks since 2011 have been recognized by the World Organization for Animal Health. 3.5 million livestock were culled in Korea after a foot and mouth outbreak at the end of 2010. There have been no reported cases of the viral infection since that situation was brought under control. The World Organization for Animal Health has also declared Korea as being safe from mad cow disease, goat plague and African horse sickness. Korean officials say the changes will help boost the nation's meat exports.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this hour. For that, we'll turn to Eunice Kim standing by at the news center.
Eunice, early results are coming in on Egypt's presidential election, and no real surprises at all here. Former military chief al-Sisi is headed for a huge win.
Hi, Mark. That's right. Almost all of the ballots have been counted as morning dawns in Cairo. With some 88% of Egypt's polling stations accounted for, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has 96% of voter support under his name. This according to state television, which also said his opponent, leftist Hamdin Sabahi, received 3.8% of votes counted so far. Al-Sisi is, of course, the general who had ousted elected Islamist President Mohamed Morsi last year, and he enjoys a wave of support as someone who can bring stability to Egypt. Now, crowds were already celebrating his victory late at night, waving flags and honking car horns, as you hear there, at the iconic Tahrir Square. Egypt's election committee put voter turnout at over 46%, which was still significantly lower than the 80% the general had hoped for a mandate from the people. The polls were extended to a third day yesterday to give Egyptians more time to cast their ballots and raise that voter turnout. Thailand's army chief is set to meet with a team of advisors scheduled to begin this hour, or 10 a.m. Bangkok time. A senior military officer told Reuters General Prayut Chan-o-cha called the meeting to discuss a division of responsibilities as well as ideas to help prop up the domestic economy that appears to have taken a hit from last week's coup. Earlier, authorities relaxed its curfew to 4 hours from midnight to 4 a.m. in an attempt to lessen the coup's impact on the country's tourism industry. An army spokesman also said 124 of the 253 politicians and activists they had summoned following the coup have been released. U.S. President Barack Obama has presented a new foreign policy direction for the United States, one that of collective action and restraint that launches large-scale military operations only when core American interests are under fire. Addressing fresh graduates of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, President Obama said America would lead by working with other states to fight the increasingly diffused form of terror, which he said remained the most direct threat to American society. Relatedly, he announced a $5 billion terrorism partnership fund to help countries fight extremists. Obama's speech is being seen as a response to critics who have accused the president of being too soft on Syria, Russia, and China. An advisor to fugitive Edward Snowden says the NSA whistleblower is unlikely to return to the U.S. under the current conditions set by the 1917 Espionage Act. Ben Wiesner, a lawyer with the ACLU, said a negotiated settlement that distinguishes between sharing information for public interest's sake and selling secrets to a foreign enemy would be necessary. The comments follow a series of interviews that had U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry telling CBS News Snowden had betrayed his country and challenged him to man up and return to the United States. Soon after that, as you saw earlier, NBC News aired Snowden's first U.S. interview, during which the 30-year-old disclosed that he had been a trained spy and not a low-level analyst as he was portrayed.
Good afternoon. Well, today should be hotter than yesterday across the nation. The high in Seoul will hover around 31 degrees Celsius, and in Daegu, it's expected to soar to 33. So today should be the hottest day of the year so far for most areas. But lingering yellow dust continues to blanket the western parts of the peninsula. In fact, ultra-fine dust advisory could be issued in Seoul in any minute. So be sure to have a face mask with you before heading out today. Also, the UV level will be quite high today, so don't forget to apply a good amount of sunblock before heading out. Now, it's been super hot lately, making it feel more like midsummer, and it's going to get hotter each day, so please take good care of yourself. Now, over to Jindo, the winds and waves should be much calmer today than yesterday under mostly sunny skies. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The high in Seoul will rise to 31, while Daegu tops out at 34, and Busan should top out at 27 later on. Now, let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju and Dokdo should see a high of 26 and 25. Daejeon will reach 31, while Mount Kumgang tops out at 23. Well, that's all for me today, but I'll be back with more updates tomorrow morning.
And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Jinju and I will be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.